They said she was too old to understand their world. They said she should be grateful for what little she had. But what they didn't know was that the woman they mocked owned the very floor they stood on. This is the story of Eleanor Vance, a mother who gave everything and then decided it was time to take everything back. The restaurant shimmered with soft golden light. Crystal chandeliers, velvet chairs, the sound of expensive laughter echoing like music only the wealthy could afford. The Gilded Sparrow, Portland's finest restaurant, was alive with chatter that night. Waiters glided across the marble floors, their trays balanced like crowns. Every guest seemed to belong there, except, apparently, Eleanor Vance. She stood quietly near the table reserved for her eldest son's promotion party. Her hands, aged but graceful, held a small gift bag. Inside was a watch she'd saved up to buy, something special for Mark, her firstborn. She had worn her best dress, a modest navy gown with pearl buttons. She didn't look rich, but she looked dignified. The moment she arrived, her daughter-in-law Chloe smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Oh, Eleanor," Chloe said softly, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We didn't think you'd actually come. You must have mistaken this place for one of those diners you like. Don't worry, though. I'm sure you'd be more comfortable somewhere like Burger Barn." The laughter that followed was quiet but cruel. Even Mark chuckled awkwardly, not daring to defend his mother. For a second, Eleanor stood frozen. She felt the heat of humiliation crawl up her neck. The room blurred, not from tears, but from the sharp sting of disappointment. She had worked her whole life for these children, and now they laughed at her in public, in a place she had helped build with her own hidden hands. She could have left. She could have walked out and cried in her car, but she didn't. Instead, she took a slow breath, adjusted the strap of her bag, and walked toward the host stand. The young hostess looked startled. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Eleanor's voice was calm, clear, and firm. "Yes, please tell David that Eleanor Vance is here." Within seconds, the manager, a tall man in a tailored suit, rushed out from the kitchen. The moment he saw her, his expression changed. He straightened his tie and bowed slightly. "Mrs. Vance," he said respectfully, loud enough for several tables to hear. "We weren't expecting you tonight. Would you like your usual table?" The restaurant fell quiet. Mark's laughter died instantly. Chloe blinked in confusion. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Yes, David. My usual table will do just fine. And please, send a bottle of our best red wine to that table." She nodded toward Mark and Chloe. "With my compliments." A murmur rippled through the crowd. David nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Vance." Eleanor sat down at the best table in the restaurant, the one reserved for only the most important guests. Heads turned. Whispers spread like wildfire. Mark stood up slowly. "Mom, what's going on?" Eleanor looked up at him calmly. "What's going on," she said softly, "is that this restaurant you're so proud to dine in, this symbol of class and success, belongs to me." You could have heard a pin drop. Even Chloe's perfect smile vanished. "You're joking," she whispered. Eleanor tilted her head. "I'm not. The Gilded Sparrow is part Vance Holdings, a company I co-founded 15 years ago. I simply chose not to tell anyone, especially those who thought they were above me." The silence that followed was heavy, uncomfortable, electric. Then Eleanor stood up. Her voice carried through the room. Calm, steady, but powerful enough to make even the waiters stop. "For years, I washed sheets and scrubbed floors so my children could live better than I did. I worked double shifts, saved every dollar, and learned everything I could from the people I served. I didn't ask for gratitude, just respect. But somewhere along the way, my love turned invisible, and my sacrifices became jokes." Her eyes met Mark's. "I gave you everything I had, and somehow it made you ashamed of me." Mark's face turned red. Chloe looked down at her plate, unable to speak. Eleanor sighed softly and placed her hand on the table, her fingers trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. "Tonight, you laughed at me, but you did it in my house. Every chair, every fork, every paycheck here exists because of the woman you tried to humiliate." Then she turned to David. "David, would you please run the documents?" He nodded and returned with a neat folder. Eleanor opened it and placed it gently on the table in front of her stunned son. Inside are the ownership papers, not just for this restaurant, but for several hotels, cafes, and properties under my company, including the office building where your bank is located, Mark. A gasp moved through the restaurant. Mark swallowed hard. Mom, I didn't know. No, she said, her voice soft but cutting. You didn't want to know. Eleanor smiled faintly, not out of victory, but from deep sadness. This isn't revenge. This is a reminder. That worth doesn't wear designer clothes, and class doesn't come from a paycheck. You may have forgotten who I am, but I never forgot what it means to work for something. She stood up, lifted her glass of wine, and said quietly, to humility, the finest wine we'll ever taste. The audience clapped hesitantly, unsure whether to cheer or to stay silent. But Eleanor didn't care anymore. She had reclaimed her dignity, and in that moment, she felt taller than she ever had. When she left the restaurant that night, the cool air felt lighter. She walked with steady steps, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. There were tears in her eyes, but not from pain, from release. She had carried years of unspoken sorrow, of being looked down upon by those she loved most. But tonight, she had turned that pain into power. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The story of that night at the Gilded Sparrow spread like wildfire. By morning, every major blog and business page in Portland had the same headline. Widow secretly owns luxury restaurant. Humiliates arrogant family in public. Mark's colleagues whispered behind his back. Chloe's social circle went silent. Even Luke, the younger son, who had always stayed quiet in family conflicts, was forced to face the truth. Their mother was not who they thought she was. For Eleanor, however, there was no satisfaction in the chaos. She didn't wake up smiling or proud. She sat in her kitchen that morning, sipping coffee from the same chipped mug she'd owned for 20 years. The house was quiet, filled with memories of her late husband, Charles, his laugh, his smell, his warmth. She whispered softly, Charles, I did what I had to, because deep down, Eleanor's heart still ached. She had never wanted to destroy her children. She only wanted them to understand, to see her, to value what they had dismissed. A few days later, she invited them all to her home, the same small suburban house they had once mocked for being too plain. Mark, Chloe, and Luke arrived together. They were nervous, their voices low. Chloe's pride had cracked. She looked lost without her perfect social mask. Mark's shoulders drooped. The confident man who once strutted through banks now couldn't hold his mother's gaze. Eleanor stood at the window, calm as always. Sit, she said gently. We have a lot to talk about. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Mark broke the silence. Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I didn't know how much you did for us. I thought you just worked to survive. Eleanor turned to him, eyes steady. You thought wrong. I worked to build, not just survive. And you took what I built for granted. Tears gathered in Luke's eyes. Mom, please, we're sorry. We really are. Eleanor nodded slowly, her voice soft but firm. Sorry doesn't rebuild character. Luke, it's a start, but not enough. Then she placed 3 envelopes on the table. Each had a name written neatly on it. Mark, Chloe, Luke. They hesitated before opening them. Inside, each found a document, a repayment plan. Not for money, but for service. Mark frowned. What is this? Eleanor clasped her hands together. It's your second chance. You owe me, not in dollars, but in understanding. I spent decades doing work you all consider beneath you. Now it's your turn. She looked directly at Mark. You will work as a janitorial supervisor at one of my hotels. You'll manage cleaning staff, handle maintenance reports, and learn what it means to be invisible but essential. Chloe's mouth fell open. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, Eleanor said quietly. You, Chloe, will be a prep cook in one of our kitchens. No makeup, no nails, no shortcuts. You'll start at 6 a.m. and go home smelling of garlic and oil. You'll learn how to make something that feeds others before feeding yourself. Chloe's face turned pale. That's humiliating. Eleanor smiled faintly. So is mocking someone who fed you for years. Then she turned to Luke, her voice softening. Luke, you've always been gentle, too gentle. You will work in property maintenance, fixing things, learning responsibility, and finding pride in honest work. Luke nodded silently. He didn't argue. He understood. Eleanor continued, her tone steady. You will all live in company housing, the same modest apartments our employees stay in. A portion of your salaries will be deducted each month as repayment for the money I invested in your lives. Not to punish you, but to teach you value. Chloe's eyes filled with tears. You can't do this, Eleanor. People will talk. They already are, Eleanor said simply. Let them. And just like that, the line between privilege and humility began to blur. The first few weeks were brutal. Mark woke up before dawn, cleaning hotel corridors and fixing plumbing issues. The same executives who once praised him as brilliant now walked past without a glance. His hands blistered. His pride cracked. Chloe's mornings were worse. She cried the first time a head chef yelled at her for slicing onions wrong. Her hands burned from hot pans and endless dishwashing. But slowly, she began to notice something she had never seen before, the quiet dignity of the people who worked beside her. People who smiled even after 12-hour shifts. People who laughed over simple meals. They didn't have luxury, but they had peace. And Luke found himself changing the most. Working in maintenance, he learned to fix broken faucets, patch walls, and help tenants who needed small repairs. For the first time, he felt useful, not just comfortable. He met people who treated him like a friend, not like a boss's son. Among them was Sophia, a gentle volunteer who spent her weekends at Whispering Pines, a senior home Eleanor supported through her foundation. Sophia's kindness lit something in Luke. One afternoon, as they repainted the senior lounge together, she said softly, You know, humility isn't weakness. It's seeing others clearly for the first time. Luke smiled. I think I'm finally starting to understand what my mom was trying to teach us. Months passed. Slowly, the Vance family began to heal in unexpected ways. Mark no longer looked down on others. He learned to lead with empathy, to say thank you to the staff who had once gone unseen. Chloe began cooking with pride, crafting meals that reminded her of home. She even started designing special menus for the elderly, making food easier to chew and digest. It made her feel human again. And Luke, once quiet and uncertain, became the heart of the maintenance crew. His honesty earned respect, and his relationship with Sophia deepened into something beautiful. Every week, the three siblings volunteered at Whispering Pines. At first, it was part of their repayment plan, but soon they began visiting even on their days off. They listened to the stories of old souls, people who, like their mother, had once been forgotten by their families. Through those stories, they saw their mother's pain in new light. 1 year later, the Van Cess gathered again, not in a fancy restaurant, but in Eleanor's garden. A simple dinner under warm yellow lights. The table was covered with homemade food, some dishes made by Chloe herself. There was laughter, real laughter, not the polished, prideful kind, but the honest kind that comes after healing. Mark raised his glass. Mom, he said softly, I don't know how to thank you. You taught us what real wealth is. Eleanor smiled. And what is it? Mark thought for a moment. Work that has meaning, people who matter, and love that doesn't fade when the money does. Chloe wiped her eyes. I used to think respect was something others gave you, but now I know it starts with how you treat people. Luke added gently, and how you treat yourself. For a long moment, Eleanor said nothing. She just looked at her children, truly looked, and saw not arrogance, not shame, but growth. Her heart swelled with pride, the kind she hadn't felt in years. She reached across the table and held their hands. Then I've done my job. They sat in silence, the evening breeze whispering through the trees. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, watching the golden sunset. She thought of all the years of scrubbing floors, the loneliness, the ridicule, the heartbreak, and how it all led here, to this peace. In that quiet moment, she realized something. She didn't just reclaim her dignity, she rebuilt her family's soul. Her story was no longer one of pain, but of power. Not revenge, but redemption. Eleanor smiled, whispering to herself, "The meek shall inherit the earth, indeed." And as laughter filled the garden once more, she finally felt what she had the morning sun filter through the curtains of Eleanor's small home, painting soft gold across the floor. The smell of coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint hum of the city outside. Eleanor sat at her kitchen table, a familiar ritual she cherished, one hand wrapped around her mug, the other resting on a worn photo album. Inside were old pictures, her boys as children, her husband Charles smiling beside her at their small house, the early years of struggle. She turned the pages slowly, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. So much had changed. So much had been lost. And yet, somehow, she had found something new in return. Peace. A year had passed since the reckoning. Her children's lives had been transformed, not just by hard work, but by humility and love. Mark was now managing one of her hotels, not from an office chair, but from the floor, checking in with cleaning crews, greeting guests personally, helping staff with pride. He was respected not because of his title, but because of his compassion. Chloe had become the head chef at the Gilded Sparrow, a role no one could have imagined before. Her food carried warmth now, meals inspired by the comfort dishes Eleanor used to cook when money was tight. People came not for luxury, but for soul. And every time an elderly guest smiled at her meal, Chloe remembered where she had gone wrong, and how far she had come. Luke, always a quiet one, had turned his maintenance job into something more, a small initiative under Vance Holdings called Hands That Build. He hired young people from struggling families and trained them in technical skills. His compassion became his strength, and his love for Sophia, now his fiancée, kept him grounded. And Eleanor had begun her greatest project yet, the New Dawn Fund. It was a charity designed for seniors forgotten by their families. The fund helped them find work if they wanted it, dignity if they had lost it, and community if they were lonely. She spent her days visiting homes, talking with people who had stories like hers, women who had given their lives to their families and were left behind when their usefulness ran out. "I know that pain," she would tell them gently, "but I also know what it means to rise again." One quiet afternoon, as she reviewed charity reports in her office, David, her trusted partner, knocked softly. "Mrs. Vance," he said with a warm smile, "you have visitors." She looked up, slightly surprised. "Who?" "Your children." When they entered, Eleanor's heart swelled. Mark looked confident but humble, Chloe radiant but calm, Luke content and strong. There was no tension this time, only affection. Chloe spoke first, holding out an envelope. "We brought you something." Eleanor opened it carefully. Inside was a deed, not for a business, but for land. "It's a community center," Mark explained. "A new branch for the New Dawn Fund. We bought the property together. It's going to be called the Eleanor Vance Center for Renewal." Eleanor blinked, her eyes welling with tears. "You did this for me?" "No, Mom," Luke said softly. "We did it because of you." For a long moment, she couldn't speak. She simply reached out and held their hands, feeling the warmth of the same fingers she had once washed, held, and prayed over his children. Her heart whispered silently, "Charles, our boys finally came home." The opening of the Eleanor Vance Center became a moment that touched the entire city. Former hotel staff, community members, and even those who once looked down on her attended. Eleanor stood at the podium in a soft gray dress, her hair silver in the sunlight. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "I used to think success was something you earned once, a single moment, a shining prize. But it's not. Success is choosing to rise every day, no matter how the world sees you. It's scrubbing floors until your reflection shines back at you, not out of shame, but out of pride." She looked at her children in the crowd. "I built my empire out of pain, but I rebuilt my family out of forgiveness." The audience stood and applauded, not for a rich woman, but for a strong one. Later that evening, after the ceremony, Eleanor sat alone outside the new center. The lights glowed softly, the laughter of guests fading into the night. She watched her children talk and laugh with volunteers, and she felt a calm she hadn't known in decades. David joined her quietly. "You did it," he said. Eleanor chuckled softly. "No, we did it. You helped me turn my heartbreak into purpose." He smiled. "What will you do now?" Eleanor looked up at the stars. "Live quietly, love loudly, and keep giving until there's nothing left to give." She paused, her gaze distant. "You know, David, I used to be afraid of getting old. I thought age meant fading away. But now I see, growing old is a final reward for those who live with courage." They sat in silence for a while, the night breeze cool and gentle. Eleanor thought about everything. The years of struggle, the night she cried alone, the humiliation, and the moment she took back her power. Every piece of it had led her here, not to wealth, but to wisdom. Weeks later, in her home garden, she gathered her children again. The flowers she had planted years ago were in full bloom. They had dinner under the open sky, the same way they did a year earlier. This time, there was no guilt, no tension, just family. Laughter rolled across the table like a melody. Eleanor lifted her glass and said softly, "To new beginnings for all of us." Mark smiled. "You taught us that life doesn't end when people forget you. It ends when you forget yourself." Been chasing all her life, respect, love, and peace earned the hard way. Eleanor laughed gently. "Then may none of us ever forget who we are." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A breeze passed through the flowers, and Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, feeling her husband's presence, her past, her peace. The journey was complete. The woman who had once been overlooked now stood as a symbol of resilience, not just for her family, but for anyone who had ever been underestimated. And as the stars began to appear one by one, Eleanor whispered to herself, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember what truly matters. Dignity, family, love." Her story was no longer about revenge. It was about renewal. And in that quiet night, Eleanor Vance finally felt eternal peace.